Good evening, thoughtful traveller, and welcome to this quiet corner of the night. Whether you've come to gently close your day or simply rest your mind beneath the hush of calm curiosity, I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, we won't chase facts or headlines. Instead, we'll sink softly into the questions that have stirred human hearts for centuries. If you'd like, feel free to share in the comments where in the world you're listening from. There's something comforting in knowing that, even as we lie scattered across oceans and cities, we're connected in this peaceful pause, together in thought. And if you find solace in timeless wonder about the stars, the soul, or the stories that shape us, I invite you to subscribe so we can share many more quiet journeys like this. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. What is reality? The nature of existence. Reality is a word we use often. We say we return to reality after a dream, or accuse someone of losing touch with reality, when their thoughts stray too far from what we think is reasonable. But when we pause to ask what reality actually is, we find ourselves in deep waters. From the moment human beings first began to reflect on their surroundings, they've asked a simple, haunting question. What is real? Is the world as we perceive it the world as it truly is? Or is everything filtered, perhaps even distorted, by the lens of our own minds? The ancient Greek philosopher Plato gave one of the earliest and most influential attempts to answer this question. He imagined a group of people who had lived their entire lives chained inside a dark cave. Behind them burned a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners passed objects that cast shadows on the wall before them. These shadows were all the prisoners had ever seen. To them, the shadows were reality, but in truth, they were only dim projections of a far more complex world. Plato believed that we too are like those prisoners. We live in a world of appearances, things we can see, touch, and measure. But these are only shadows of a deeper, unchanging reality. For Plato, this true reality was made up of perfect forms, or ideas, which exist beyond space and time. A circle drawn in the sand is never truly perfect, but the idea of a circle, the concept of perfect roundness, exists in a realm of pure thought. This idea challenges the assumption that reality is only what we can sense. It invites the unsettling possibility that the truest parts of the world are the ones we cannot touch, see, or hear. Centuries later, the philosopher René Descartes took up the question from a different angle. In the 1600s, as the scientific revolution unfolded across Europe, Descartes became fascinated with the power of doubt. He realized that many things he once believed had turned out to be false. So he asked, "What can I know with absolute certainty?" He imagined a deceptive demon, capable of fooling him into believing anything. That the sky is blue, that the earth is solid, even that he has a body. Stripped of every assumption, Descartes found only one certainty, that he was thinking. "I think, therefore I am," he concluded. Even if everything else was an illusion, the very act of doubting proved that something, a thinking self, must exist. This led Descartes to suggest that the mind, the self that thinks, is more fundamental than the physical world. For him, consciousness was not just a part of reality, it was the starting point. But not all philosophers have agreed with Descartes. In the 18th century, the Scottish philosopher David Hume argued that even our own minds might not be as solid as we think. When Hume examined his own consciousness, he couldn't find a stable self. Instead, he found a flow of thoughts, feelings, and impressions, like a river with no enduring substance beneath it. The self, he proposed, is not a single thing, but a bundle of perceptions, constantly shifting, moment by moment. So now the question of reality becomes more complex. If even the self, the I that experiences the world, is not clearly defined, then what, if anything, can be called real? In the modern era, science has added yet another layer to this inquiry. Physics tells us that the solid world around us is mostly empty space. The atoms that make up everything we see are tiny clouds of energy with vast gaps between them. Quantum mechanics, a field that studies the behavior of the tiniest particles in the universe, has shown that particles can behave like waves, that their behavior changes when they're observed, and that at the most fundamental level, certainty gives way to probability. To some, this suggests that reality is stranger than we can comprehend. To others, it means that our models of reality are incomplete, and perhaps always will be. Then there's the perspective of Eastern philosophy, which has long questioned the solidity of the world. In ancient Indian texts, like the Upanishads, reality is described as Maya, an illusion. This doesn't necessarily mean that nothing exists, but that what we see is not the ultimate truth. Beneath the appearances lies something deeper, something eternal and unchanging. In Buddhism too, the idea of impermanence runs deep. Everything changes, everything passes, clinging to things as if they were permanent causes suffering. True understanding comes from seeing through this illusion. So, we have shadows on cave walls, deceptive demons, bundles of impressions, quantum strangeness, and spiritual illusions. Where does this leave us? It leaves us with humility. When we speak of reality, we are speaking of something both intimately close and impossibly distant. We live in it, we breathe it, and yet we may never fully grasp what it is. Every age, every culture has brought new answers, each colored by its time and its tools. And perhaps that's the point. Perhaps reality is not something to be captured like a prize, but something to be continually rediscovered, explored, questioned, and contemplated. There are moments, quiet moments, when we feel the weight of this mystery, when we gaze at the stars and feel the smallness of our lives, when we lose track of time in a conversation or a piece of music, when we wake from a dream unsure of where the line is between imagination and truth. In those moments, the question of what is real isn't an abstract one, it's personal. It reminds us that behind the noise and motion of everyday life lies a question that still waits, patient and undimmed. What is this world? And what are we who move within it? As we end this first chapter, there is no final answer. only the beginning of a path walked by poets and physicists, monks and mathematicians, a path that starts, as all paths do, with a question. And that question is simple but profound. What is reality? Chapter 2. Do we have free will, or is everything determined? Among the oldest and most persistent questions in philosophy is this: are we truly free to choose our actions, or are our decisions merely the product of forces beyond our control? On its surface, free will feels obvious. You decide what to eat for dinner, what to say in a conversation, whether to go left or right at the next street. Each moment feels like a small choice, and those choices seem to belong to you. But when philosophers, scientists, and thinkers dig beneath this surface, they find a more complicated story. The idea of determinism holds that every event, including every human action, is the inevitable result of previous events, governed by the laws of nature. In a deterministic universe, everything that happens is the outcome of prior causes. If you could somehow know the position and motion of every atom in the universe at one moment, you could, in theory, calculate everything that would ever happen afterward. This view gained great strength during the scientific revolution. In the 17th century, Isaac Newton's laws of motion and gravity showed that physical objects moved in predictable, mathematically precise ways. The universe began to look like a vast machine, ticking forward in perfect order. The French philosopher Pierre-Simon Laplace imagined a powerful intellect, sometimes called Laplace's demon, that, knowing the position of every particle in the universe, could predict the entire future. In such a universe, free will seems to vanish. If everything is determined by prior causes, then your choices, what to say, what to believe, what to feel, were already set in motion long before you were born. But this view has always had its challenges. In the 18th century, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant insisted that moral responsibility depends on free will. We praise courage and blame cruelty because we believe people choose how to act. If no one can choose, then no one can be held accountable. Kant believed that even if the physical world follows strict laws, human beings, as moral agents, must be free, not in a physical sense, but in a rational, ethical one. This gave rise to a new way of thinking about freedom, not as the absence of cause, but as the ability to act in accordance with one's own reason. A person who acts from their own understanding of right and wrong, rather than being pushed by instinct or pressure, is, in Kant's view, truly free. Still, the tension between freedom and determinism remained. In the 20th century, new scientific developments added more complexity. Quantum mechanics, the branch of physics that deals with subatomic particles, showed that at the smallest scales, the universe isn't strictly deterministic. Particles don't always behave in predictable ways. Sometimes they act randomly. For some, this opened a door. Maybe if nature isn't fully determined, there's room for free will. But randomness, by itself, doesn't help much. If your actions are random, they still aren't really yours. You're not choosing. Things are just happening unpredictably. So the question lingers. If our choices aren't completely caused, and they're not random, what are they? Meanwhile, neuroscience brought its own challenges. In the 1980s, a scientist named Benjamin Libet conducted an experiment where participants were asked to move their finger whenever they felt like it. As they did, he measured their brain activity. What he found was surprising. The brain showed signs of preparing to move the finger a fraction of a second before the participant became consciously aware of the decision. This suggested that what we think of as a conscious choice might actually be the result of unconscious processes that begin earlier than we realize. In other words, the decision is already in motion before we're aware of making it. Some interpreted this as a death blow to free will. If our brains decide before we do, then perhaps we, as conscious agents, are just passengers along for the ride. Others were more cautious. They pointed out that a lab experiment involving finger movement isn't the same as making a difficult life choice. Still, the idea that our brains are steering us in ways we don't control has only deepened the mystery. Philosophers have offered different ways to make sense of all this. Some are compatibilists. They believe that free will and determinism can coexist. According to this view, freedom doesn't require the absence of causes. Instead, it means acting in accordance with your own desires, beliefs, and intentions, even if those too have causes. Under compatibilism, a choice can be both determined and free. For example, you might choose to study philosophy because you're deeply curious. Your curiosity may be shaped by your upbringing, your culture, your biology. But if you're acting from your own character, your own understanding, then that's enough to call the action free. Others disagree. They argue that if our actions are ultimately caused by things outside our control, genes, childhood experiences, neurological patterns, then we are not truly responsible. We are simply the result of what came before. And then there are those who take a radically different approach. The existentialist philosophers, like Jean-Paul Sartre, insisted that human freedom is real and absolute. In Sartre's view, we are condemned to be free. We can't escape the responsibility of choice. Even choosing not to choose is a choice. For Sartre, there is no hidden essence, no divine plan, no predetermined fate. We exist first, and then we define ourselves through action. Every moment is a decision, and with every decision, we shape who we are. This is a liberating idea, but also a heavy one. There's no one else to blame, no fate to hide behind, just us and the choices we make. And yet, even here, freedom is complicated. We don't choose the circumstances of our birth, the language we speak, the time we live in. We inherit beliefs, wounds, and traditions. We carry burdens we didn't ask for. So the question becomes, how much freedom do we really have? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. Perhaps we are not entirely free, nor entirely bound. Perhaps freedom is not the absence of cause, but the ability to reflect, to resist, to imagine alternatives. A river flows because of gravity and terrain, but a human being can notice the river and choose to build a bridge. Across cultures and centuries, this question has taken many forms. In ancient Greek tragedy, fate ruled supreme. The gods set the course, and mortals suffered for resisting it. In Stoic philosophy, Freedom meant accepting what you cannot control and mastering what you can, your own mind. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the cycle of karma suggests that actions have consequences that ripple across lifetimes, and that liberation comes not through will but through wisdom. Today, as science, psychology, and philosophy continue to evolve, the debate continues. Are we free? Are we determined? Are we something in between, shaped by forces, but still capable of shaping in return? Maybe it's not a question with a final answer. Maybe it's a mirror, one that reflects our deepest hopes and fears. We want to believe we're free because we want our lives to mean something. We want to feel that we are not just reacting to the world, but participating in it. And maybe that's the truest kind of freedom we can hope for. Not absolute control, but the awareness that our choices matter. Even if we are influenced by forces we don't fully see, even if our decisions are shaped by countless causes, the fact that we can think, reflect, and choose again, that is something powerful. So tonight, as you think back on the choices you've made and those still ahead, you might wonder, how many of them were truly free? How many were habits, echoes, patterns passed down or picked up? And more importantly, what choices are still yours to make? Chapter 3. What makes something right or wrong? Every day, in ways both large and small, we make moral decisions. We decide whether to tell the truth or to lie, whether to speak up or stay silent, whether to help, to hurt, to judge, or to forgive. But what is it that makes an action right or wrong? At first, the answers might seem simple. We were taught certain values as children: to be kind, to share, to treat others the way we want to be treated. But as we grow older, we realize that life is full of moral gray areas. Sometimes kindness means telling someone the truth, even when it hurts. Sometimes justice means choosing between two wrongs. And so we turn to ethics, the branch of philosophy that asks how we ought to live and why. The earliest recorded ethical thinking can be found in ancient texts across cultures. In ancient India, the concept of dharma spoke of duty, a moral order in the universe that each person was responsible for upholding. In Confucian China, ethics centered on harmony, respect, and proper relationships between people. In ancient Greece, philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle began asking whether morality was based on reason, virtue, or something divine. Socrates, known for asking difficult questions, challenged people to think about why they believed what they believed. He asked, "Is something good because the gods say it is? Or do the gods say it's good because it is good?" This question still resonates today. Is morality something we discover or something we create? His student Plato believed that moral values, like truth and justice, existed beyond the material world, eternal and unchanging. They weren't invented by humans, but glimpsed through reason. Aristotle, on the other hand, was more grounded. He believed that the goal of life was to flourish, to live well, in accordance with our nature. For him, ethics was about developing good character, courage, honesty, generosity. These virtues, practiced over time, led to a life of balance and fulfillment. Much later, in the 18th century, two philosophers would offer radically different visions of morality. One was Immanuel Kant. He believed that moral rules should be universal and absolute. You shouldn't lie, not even once, because lying disrespects the dignity of the person you lie to. For Kant, morality comes from reason, and its central command is this: treat every person as an end in themselves, never as a means to an end. This means you should never use someone, not for money, not for power, not even to spare their feelings, because people aren't tools. They have value simply because they are human. At the same time, a very different theory was emerging in England. Jeremy Bentham and later John Stuart Mill developed a view called utilitarianism. Instead of focusing on rules, they focused on consequences. An action is right, they argued, if it produces the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. According to utilitarianism, lying might be acceptable, even good, if it prevents harm or brings about more well-being. A difficult truth that causes pain might be wrong if it brings more suffering than comfort. The only thing that ultimately matters is the result. This led to fierce debates. Kantian ethics values principles, even if they lead to hard outcomes. Utilitarianism values outcomes, even if it means breaking the rules. One says, never lie. The other says, it depends. So which is right? Each theory offers something compelling. Principles matter, so do consequences. But neither approach can answer every moral dilemma. Imagine a scenario. A runaway train is headed toward 5 people tied to the tracks. You can pull a lever to divert it onto another track. But that track has 1 person on it. Do you pull the lever? Utilitarians would say yes. Saving 5 lives is better than saving 1. But a Kantian might say no, because pulling the lever makes you directly responsible for that 1 person's death. Even if more people survive, you've violated a moral rule. This thought experiment, and others like it, show how challenging moral reasoning can be. There is no answer that feels entirely comfortable, and that discomfort is part of the human condition. In recent decades, some philosophers have turned their attention away from rules and consequences towards something more personal: relationships, empathy, and care. This ethics of care, often associated with feminist thought, emphasizes compassion and responsibility to others, especially those closest to us. In this view, morality is not just about abstract principles. It's about listening, about showing up, about understanding that people are not problems to be solved, but lives to be honored. Ethics becomes less about what is right in general and more about what is needed in this moment, by this person, in this context. And there are other voices still. Some argue that morality is not universal at all, that it's shaped by culture, history, and power. What one society calls justice, another might call injustice. What one era sees as moral progress, another might see as moral decay. This view, called moral relativism, doesn't deny the importance of ethics, but questions whether there's only one way to be good. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with the realization that morality is not a single road. but a vast and shifting landscape. There are maps, some drawn in reason, others in feeling, still others in faith. But no map is perfect. We find our way by walking. Some days we follow rules. Other days we weigh consequences. Sometimes we act from instinct or love or anger. Sometimes we try to be consistent. Other times we're just trying to do the least harm. And sometimes we don't know what the right thing is until we've already done something wrong. What matters, perhaps, is not always choosing perfectly, but choosing thoughtfully. To ask, even quietly, what kind of world do I want to help create? What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of pain can I prevent or help heal? These questions don't have easy answers, but they are worth asking again and again. Because ethics is not just about big moments, heroic sacrifices, or difficult decisions. It's also about the small, unseen acts, the choice to listen instead of argue, the choice to forgive, the choice to speak up or to step back. These choices shape the world slowly and invisibly, like water shaping stone. And in the end, perhaps that is what it means to live an ethical life. Not to follow a perfect system, but to care enough to ask the question, what is the right thing to do? And then to try, with all your imperfect humanity, to answer it. Chapter 4. Where do we come from? From ancient altars to modern observatories, the question of God has persisted like a drumbeat through human history. Is there a creator behind the cosmos, a divine mind behind matter? Or is the universe a vast and beautiful accident, without intention, without plan? This is not only a question of belief, it's a question that touches on everything: meaning, purpose, morality, even the shape of human hope. Throughout history, people have given many answers. Some find God in scripture and tradition, others in silence and solitude, and some in the patterns of stars or the elegance of a mathematical law. Still others find no God at all, and see in that absence not despair, but a call to shape meaning for themselves. Philosophy has long wrestled with this question, offering arguments both for and against the existence of a divine being. These arguments don't always aim to convert or disprove. Often they seek to clarify, to test our assumptions, to explore the logic behind belief. One of the oldest and most intuitive arguments for God is the design argument, also known as the teleological argument. It observes that the universe appears finely tuned, ordered in a way that seems deliberate. The planets move in predictable orbits. Life emerges from a precise balance of forces. A single alteration in gravity or atomic structure, and the cosmos, or life, might not exist. The 18th century philosopher William Paley illustrated this with a simple analogy. Imagine walking along a beach and finding a watch in the sand. You wouldn't assume it had come together by chance. Its complexity, its purpose, would lead you to conclude that someone designed it. In the same way, Paley argued, the complexity of nature points to a designer, God. Critics have challenged this. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution offered a powerful counterpoint: natural selection. Over time, life forms adapt and evolve, not through conscious design but through survival and variation. What seems like design may be the result of long, blind processes. Even so, the fine-tuning of the universe remains a puzzle. Why are the laws of physics what they are? Some have suggested the multiverse, the idea that our universe is just one of countless others, each with different laws. In that vast range, some would inevitably support life. We happen to live in one that does. But the multiverse theory, like God, raises more questions than it answers. If there are infinite universes, where did they come from? What governs them? Can something come from nothing? This brings us to another classic argument, the cosmological argument. It begins with a simple observation that everything that begins to exist has a cause. A tree comes from a seed. A sound comes from a movement. Nothing, we believe, comes into being without something else causing it. So if the universe began to exist, as most cosmologists believe it did, what caused it? The philosopher Thomas Aquinas argued that this chain of causes must have a beginning. There must be something that caused everything else, but was not itself caused. An unmoved mover. This, he said, is what people call God. But again, there are counter-arguments. Some say the universe may be eternal, or that time itself began with the universe, making the idea of a before meaningless. Others argue that invoking God as the first cause simply moves the mystery back a step. If everything needs a cause, what caused God? The debate turns then, not just on what we believe, but on what kind of explanation we find satisfying. There is also the ontological argument, proposed by Anselm of Canterbury in the 11th century. It's not an argument from observation, but from logic. Anselm defined God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. He reasoned that if such a being exists only in the mind, then a greater being, one that exists both in the mind and in reality, could be imagined. Therefore, God must exist, or else God would not be the greatest possible being. Many have found this argument clever but unconvincing. The 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant criticized it, saying that existence is not a property like size or color. You can't define something into existence. Still, others have revived and refined the argument in modern philosophy. Yet another line of thought is the moral argument. It suggests that the existence of objective moral values points to a moral lawgiver. If some things are truly right or wrong, not just opinions or cultural norms, then there must be a source of that moral law. C.S. Lewis, the British writer and thinker, found this argument persuasive. In his book, Mere Christianity, he wrote that humans have a shared sense of right and wrong, even if they don't always agree on the details. This moral intuition, he believed, points to something beyond nature, a moral God. Skeptics counter that morality can evolve through social cooperation and empathy. What feels universal may be the result of shared biology and mutual needs. Morality, they argue, doesn't require a divine author. Then there is the argument from religious experience. Across time and culture, people have reported encounters with something greater, a presence, a peace, a light, a voice. These experiences, whether on mountaintops or in quiet rooms, can feel more real than anything else. To those who have had them, no argument is needed. To those who haven't, no argument may suffice. But there are also arguments against the existence of God, and perhaps the most powerful is the problem of evil. If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, why does evil exist? Why do innocent people suffer? Why are there wars, diseases, injustices that tear lives apart? This question has troubled believers for centuries. Some suggest that suffering builds character, or that it's the cost of free will. Others say we can't understand God's reasons, that the puzzle is too big and we only see a piece. But for many, these answers are not enough. The existence of suffering, they argue, is not just a problem to be explained. It's a reason to doubt. So where do we stand? Philosophy does not demand belief, nor does it demand disbelief. What it demands is careful thought. The question of God is not only about existence, it's about the kind of world we live in. A world with a divine purpose may look very different from one without. And yet, people have found meaning in both. The believer may look at the stars and see the signature of a creator. The skeptic may look at the same stars and marvel at a universe vast and indifferent, and still feel awe. Between belief and disbelief lies a third path: agnosticism, not knowing. Some agnostics are open to the possibility of God, but feel the evidence is unclear. Others think the question itself is beyond human understanding. And perhaps, in the end, that is where many of us live, not in certainty, but in the space between. A space of wonder, of questions, of quiet searching. Whether one believes in God, doubts, or denies, the question itself remains one of the most human of all. It asks not only what is out there, but who we are, and what we hope to find. Chapter 5. What is consciousness, and can it be explained? Among the deepest mysteries of existence is the simple fact that we are aware. We don't just move and react like machines, we experience. We see colors, feel pain, remember the past, and imagine the future. We dream, wonder, and ask questions like this one. This inner life, this rich, personal world behind the eyes, is what we call consciousness. And despite centuries of science and philosophy, no one fully understands what it is, where it comes from, or why it exists at all. It's easy to take consciousness for granted. You wake up, and there it is. The feeling of being you, the hum of thoughts, the warmth of memory, the voice in your head. But when you stop to think about it, something strange emerges. Consciousness doesn't seem to be made of anything. You can't see it under a microscope. You can't weigh it or bottle it or extract it from the brain. And yet, it is the one thing we are most certain of. The philosopher René Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." In a world of doubt, the one thing he could not question was that he was thinking, that something, somehow, was aware. Even if all else were an illusion, consciousness remained undeniable. But what exactly is it? In modern times, science has made astonishing progress in understanding the brain. We know that electrical signals pass between neurons. We've mapped brain regions involved in vision, language, emotion, and memory. We can see brain activity light up on a scan when someone feels joy, sadness, or pain. And yet, none of this explains how these signals produce experience. You can know what parts of the brain are active when someone sees the color red. But that doesn't tell you what red feels like. The sensation of red, its redness, is not a scientific measurement. It is a subjective experience. And it is this gap between the brain's mechanics and the mind's experience that forms what philosopher David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness. Why does neural activity feel like anything at all? One theory is that consciousness emerges from complexity. Just as wetness emerges from water molecules in a certain arrangement, consciousness might emerge when enough neurons interact in the right way. In this view, the brain is like a computer, complex, adaptive, and capable of generating awareness through its vast network of connections. But others argue that this doesn't really explain experience. It just describes the conditions under which experience might arise. It's like saying that music comes from vibrations in the air. True, but why do those vibrations create beauty, emotion, memory? Where does the meaning come from? Some have proposed that consciousness is not something the brain creates, but something it reveals. This is the panpsychist view. The idea that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, like space, time, or mass. Just as every particle has gravity, perhaps every particle has some form of awareness, however primitive. This doesn't mean rocks are thinking, but it suggests that mind may be woven into the fabric of existence, and that complex systems like brains don't create consciousness from nothing, but amplify and organize it into the rich experience we know. It's a controversial view, but it reflects a growing sense among some philosophers that consciousness may not be fully explainable in physical terms alone. Other thinkers suggest that our very concept of consciousness is flawed. They argue that the sense of a unified inner self is an illusion, a useful fiction created by the brain to organize its processes. This idea, sometimes called the illusionist theory, holds that there is no central I, no glowing core of awareness, just a stream of perceptions, memories, and decisions, bundled together by habit and language. In this view, asking what consciousness is may be like asking what a rainbow is made of. The rainbow is real, but it's not a thing. It's a phenomenon created by light, moisture, and perspective. Similarly, consciousness might be a process, not a substance, a pattern, not a presence. Still, the mystery remains. However we define it, consciousness feels personal, vivid, and immediate. It is not just a process of sensing, it is the feeling of sensing, the experience of being alive. And that experience raises difficult questions. Is consciousness limited to humans, or do animals possess it too? Most scientists agree that many animals, especially mammals and birds, experience pain, joy, fear. But what about simpler creatures? Does a fish feel fear or just react to danger? Does a bee have an inner world? And what about machines? As artificial intelligence grows more advanced, some have asked whether a machine could ever become conscious. Could a computer, someday, not just answer questions, but feel confusion? Not just process words, but understand? Most scientists remain skeptical. Intelligence and consciousness, they argue, are not the same. A machine can simulate conversation, even emotion, without ever experiencing it. Consciousness, in this view, is not just computation, it is experience. And that remains unique, for now, to biological minds. But others are not so sure. If consciousness is an emergent property of complexity, then a sufficiently complex system, biological or artificial, might develop it. We don't yet know where the line is, or if there is a line at all. Some of the most profound questions of consciousness are not scientific, but philosophical. What does it mean to be aware? Is consciousness something that exists only in the present moment, or does it stretch across time, shaped by memory, hope, and reflection? Is the self, the I we carry from day to day, a real, stable thing? Or is it a story we tell ourselves, a thread woven from habits and recall? And what happens when consciousness ends, if it ends? Is death the end of awareness, or its transformation? Do we disappear, or dissolve into something larger? Religions offer many answers: heaven, rebirth, unity with the divine. Science offers fewer, but all of them point to the same root: the mystery of consciousness, the mystery of being. As we explore this topic, it's worth noting how recent it is, historically speaking, for science and philosophy to treat the mind as a puzzle at all. For centuries, most cultures took consciousness for granted or explained it in spiritual terms: the soul, the spirit, the inner light. Now, we try to explain it through neurons, data, and models. And yet, the questions remain. What is it, really, to feel a moment? To remember a childhood room? To hear a voice in your mind as you read these words? Science may someday uncover a more complete map of the brain. It may explain why certain patterns lead to memory, imagination, or even the sense of self. But whether it can ever explain why experience feels like something, why red is red, why pain hurts, why joy lifts us, remains to be seen. For now, consciousness is both the tool we use to understand the world and the greatest mystery within it. It is the light by which we see, and yet, when we turn that light inward, it dazzles us. Whatever else we learn, we return to this. We are aware, and that awareness is the starting point of every thought, every dream, every question we ask about the universe and ourselves. Chapter 6. What does it mean to live a good life? It is one of the oldest and most personal questions we can ask. What does it mean to live well? To live a life that feels full, worthwhile, meaningful, not merely long or successful, but truly good. The question has echoed through every culture, every age. And while the answers have varied, shaped by beliefs, history, and circumstance, the longing behind it has remained the same. We all live once. What should we do with that time? In ancient Greece, philosophers gave this question their deepest attention. Socrates, who was sentenced to death for asking too many questions, declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. For him, a good life was a thoughtful life, one grounded in self-knowledge, in seeking truth, in questioning what others took for granted. His student Plato believed that the good life meant aligning the soul with justice and reason, not being ruled by appetite or impulse, but by wisdom. For Plato, happiness came not from wealth or pleasure, but from harmony within the self. Aristotle, Plato's student, took a more practical view. He said that the good life, or eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing, came from developing virtues, habits of character, like courage, honesty, generosity, and temperance. These weren't rules, but ways of being, refined through practice, balanced by reason, and guided by purpose. To Aristotle, happiness was not a momentary feeling. It was the full unfolding of one's potential over a lifetime. A good life was a life lived in accordance with one's nature, in connection with others, and in pursuit of excellence. Not perfection, but progress. In other traditions, the path to a good life took different forms. In ancient China, Confucius emphasized relationships, the bonds between parent and child, ruler and subject, friend and friend. To live well was to live with respect, loyalty, humility, and compassion. Harmony, both inward and outward, was the ideal. In Taoism, also rooted in China, the answer was more elusive. The good life came from flowing with the rhythms of nature, not resisting or controlling, but yielding and trusting. Like water, the Taoist sage adapts, moves without force, and finds strength in stillness. Here, the good life is not achieved, but discovered. Not through striving, but through letting go. In the West, during times of hardship, the question of the good life often turned inward. The Stoics, like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, lived in a world of wars, disease, and political turmoil. They taught that while we cannot control what happens, we can control how we respond. The good life, they said, comes from virtue and from accepting what we cannot change with courage and calm. This view echoes across cultures. In the Bhagavad Gita, a sacred Hindu text, Krishna tells Arjuna that he must fulfill his duty without attachment to the outcome. Action matters, but so does detachment. Do your part, the Gita says, but do not cling. Later, in Christian thought, the good life was often seen as one lived in faith, humility, and love, not for personal gain, but in service to others and to God. In Islamic philosophy, similar values were upheld: devotion, justice, patience, and charity. In Buddhism, the good life was one of awareness and compassion, free from craving and illusion. Across all these traditions, a pattern emerges. The good life is rarely about comfort, wealth, or even happiness in the modern sense. It is about alignment with reason, with virtue, with nature, with the divine, or with the truth of one's own being. Still, each era asks the question anew. In our time, shaped by technology, choice, and speed, the idea of a good life is often tied to freedom. The freedom to choose your path, to express yourself, to pursue your dreams. But freedom, on its own, can feel aimless. Choice is not the same as meaning, and in a world full of options, it's easy to feel lost. So we return to the deeper questions. Is a good life one that brings you joy, or one that brings joy to others? Is it a life of achievement or of peace, of self-discovery or selflessness? Can a good life be quiet, unnoticed? Can it be painful? Can it be short? Some modern philosophers suggest that meaning is what defines the good life. Not pleasure, not virtue, not success, but meaning. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that people are not destroyed by suffering, but by suffering without meaning. In his view, meaning can be found in work, in love, and even in endurance. When life is no longer about what we want from it, but what it asks of us, a deeper kind of purpose emerges. The good life, he said, is not about avoiding pain, but about rising to the occasion of your existence. Others argue that meaning is something we create, that there is no cosmic script, no universal path, that we must write our own stories and find fulfillment in the writing. This is both a freedom and a responsibility. If no one else can define your good life, then the task is yours, entirely. But this doesn't mean we must face it alone. The good life, almost universally, is understood to be a life with others, with friendship, love, community. Even the most solitary philosophers have spoken of the need for connection. Aristotle said that without friends, no one would choose to live, even with all other goods. We are not isolated minds or souls. We are beings of relationship. And much of what makes life good comes from those relationships. From kindness, trust, laughter, forgiveness. From showing up for others and allowing them to show up for us. There is no perfect formula. What matters to one person may not matter to another. What brings joy in one season may fade in the next. And so the good life is not a destination, but a practice, a way of moving through the world with awareness, care, and integrity. It is in how we spend our mornings, how we treat strangers, how we respond to failure, how we carry grief, how we celebrate others, how we choose again and again to love, to grow, to begin. And perhaps that is the clearest answer we have. A good life is not lived in grand gestures, but in daily choices, in the quiet bravery of trying to live well, despite the uncertainty of what that means. In asking the question itself, we take the first step. Chapter 7. Is time real or just an illusion? We live in time. We measure it in seconds and centuries, in sunrises and wrinkles, in calendars and memories. It flows forward, always forward, never back. It carries everything, people, places, civilizations, and sweeps them into the past. And yet, for all its familiarity, time remains one of the strangest and most elusive aspects of our existence. What is time? Is it something real, a force, a dimension, a part of the universe as solid as space or matter? Or is it an illusion, a mental construct we impose on the world to make sense of change? Philosophers have asked these questions for millennia, so have physicists, poets and mystics, and the answers, when they come, are often surprising. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Heraclitus declared that everything flows. Nothing stays the same. You cannot step into the same river twice, he said, because both you and the river are constantly changing. Time, in this view, is the engine of change, the rhythm of becoming. But another Greek philosopher, Parmenides, took the opposite view. He believed that change is an illusion, that reality is one, unchanging, eternal. What we experience as time, he argued, is just a trick of perception. The world seems to move, but in truth, it is still. Centuries later, Saint Augustine of Hippo wrestled with time in his Confessions. He wrote that he understood time until someone asked him to explain it. Then he no longer knew what it was. He noted that the past no longer exists, the future has not yet arrived, and the present, the now, slips away the moment we try to grasp it. So how can something that cannot be held or measured directly shape our entire lives? In the 17th century, Isaac Newton gave time a new form. He imagined it as an absolute, ticking independently of everything else, like a giant cosmic clock. Events unfolded within it, just as objects moved through space. Time was uniform, universal, and constant. This view lasted for centuries, until Albert Einstein shattered it. In the early 20th century, Einstein's theory of relativity showed that time is not absolute. It is relative to motion, to gravity, to perspective. A clock on a spaceship moving near the speed of light ticks more slowly than one on Earth. Time passes differently at the top of a mountain than at the bottom of a valley. More astonishing still, Einstein showed that time and space are part of a single fabric, space-time. They curve, bend, and ripple under the influence of mass and energy. And from this view, the distinction between past, present, and future begins to blur. To a physicist working within the framework of relativity, all points in time, past, present, and future, may be equally real. The universe can be seen as a four-dimensional block, where every moment exists eternally, like pages in a book. We experience the story one page at a time, but all the pages are already there. This idea, sometimes called the block universe theory, is unsettling. It suggests that the future is already written, that free will may be an illusion, and that time's flow, the feeling of now, is something the brain creates, not something that exists objectively. And yet, we do experience it. We feel the difference between before and after. We grow older. We remember the past, but not the future. Why? Neuroscience offers part of the answer. Our brains are wired to perceive change, to track motion, to store sequences, to anticipate outcomes. Consciousness is not a single moment, but a kind of mental movie, a continuous construction of now, then, and next. Time, in this view, is less a thing and more a story, a frame we build to navigate the world. But that doesn't mean it's not real. The philosopher Immanuel Kant believed that time, like space, is not a feature of the world itself, but of the way we perceive it. Time, he said, is a lens, a necessary condition for experience. We cannot think or feel or remember without it. It's not out there, waiting to be discovered. It's part of how we are. Others go further, suggesting that time might not exist at all. In quantum physics, time plays a strange and subtle role. At the most fundamental level of reality, the equations describing particles do not distinguish between past and future. time seems to disappear. Some physicists, like Carlo Rovelli, have proposed that time may not be a basic building block of the universe, but something that emerges from deeper, timeless laws. If true, this would be one of the most radical shifts in understanding since the dawn of science. It would mean that time, as we know it, is not a fundamental feature of the cosmos, but a useful approximation, like temperature or pressure, arising from countless tiny interactions. So is time real? It depends on what we mean by real. We measure it. We depend on it. Our lives are marked by it, in rhythms, in routines, in rituals. And yet, the deeper we look, the more time slips through our fingers. Perhaps it is both real and unreal, a bridge between what is and what is experienced, a thread that connects memory to moment, desire to destiny. And perhaps the more important question is not whether time exists, but how we live within it. We speak of time as a currency. We spend it, waste it, save it, give it. We say time flies, drags, heals, steals. We try to manage it, beat it, control it. And in doing so, we often forget that we are time, that we are ourselves, processes unfolding moment by moment. A child becomes an adult, a stranger becomes a friend, a single decision becomes a whole life. None of these changes can be rushed. They unfold at the speed of time, the only speed there is. And so, even if time is an illusion, it is one we live inside, one that shapes everything we know. To wonder whether time is real is to touch the edge of a mystery, one that lies not only in physics and philosophy, but in the human heart. Because at the center of our fear, our joy, our love, is the knowledge that everything passes. Moments end. People age. Even the stars will someday burn out. And yet, within that impermanence is beauty, the sweetness of a moment precisely because it won't last, the depth of a memory precisely because it did. Time may be a river, a wheel, an illusion, a curve, or it may be something else entirely, but whatever it is ours to live. Chapter 8. What is the self? Identity and the mind. At the center of every thought, every memory, every experience, there seems to be someone, you, a person who sees, feels, remembers, decides. The self feels like a constant presence, moving through time, unchanged at its core. But what is the self, really? Is it a solid, unchanging thing? Or something much more fluid, even illusory? For much of history, many believed the self was the soul, a distinct, immaterial essence that gave life to the body and persisted beyond death. In this view, the self was indivisible and eternal, the true you behind the face, the voice, the thoughts. This view shaped centuries of religious and philosophical thought. But not all traditions agreed. In ancient Buddhist philosophy, the concept of anatta, no self, teaches that there is no fixed, permanent self within us. Instead, what we call the self is a collection of changing parts, thoughts, feelings, sensations, intentions. These parts arise and pass away constantly. Clinging to the idea of a solid self the Buddha taught, is a source of suffering. Centuries later, the Scottish philosopher David Hume offered a strikingly similar view. When he examined his own mind, he found no single, unchanging self, only a stream of experiences. Thoughts, emotions, memories, all shifting, all impermanent. The idea of the self, he suggested, was a kind of mental habit, a story we tell ourselves to make sense of the flow. This idea is echoed in modern psychology and neuroscience. Our sense of self is closely tied to memory, emotion, language, and the brain's ability to organize experience. Damage certain areas of the brain, and personality can change. Lose memory, and identity begins to unravel. The self, it seems, is deeply dependent on the brain's physical processes. But this raises a deeper question. If the self is made of memories and feelings, who is the one having them? Some philosophers say this is the wrong question. There is no hidden observer behind the thoughts. The thoughts are the self. In this view, consciousness is not a thing that experiences, but the experience itself. Yet even if there is no core you, there is still a pattern. Most of us feel a thread of continuity. We remember being children. We recognize our own face. We feel ownership over our decisions. That thread may not be a solid rope, but it's still real in a functional sense. It helps us navigate the world, form relationships, build a life. Some thinkers, like philosopher Daniel Dennett, argue that the self is a story, a narrative our brain constructs to make sense of experience. We are, he says, center of narrative gravity, not things, but processes. Our identity is not a container, but a tale, shaped by culture, memory, and imagination. Others point out that our sense of self is social, formed in relationship to others. From infancy, we are shaped by language, by reflection, by how we are seen and treated. Who we are cannot be separated from the world around us. Still, the self feels deeply personal. We feel joy, grief, love, and it feels like it belongs to someone. That feeling may not come from a soul, but it is still profound. And so we live with two truths. The self is real, and the self is not fixed. We are both continuous and changing, both pattern and process, both presence and story. Perhaps the mystery of the self is not to be solved, but inhabited. Perhaps the self is not a thing to be discovered, but a relationship to be lived, between past and present, memory and desire, solitude and connection. Chapter 9. Can we truly know anything? Skepticism and knowledge. Knowledge feels like a foundation. We believe certain things, that the earth orbits the sun, that water boils at 100 degrees, that people lived before us and will live after. We trust our memories, our senses, and the words of others. But how do we know these things are true? Can we ever be certain? Skepticism, as a philosophical tradition, begins by asking that question. Not to sow doubt for its own sake, but to examine how and whether our beliefs are justified. The ancient Greek philosopher Pyrrho of Elis, often considered the first skeptic, believed that certainty was impossible. The senses can deceive us. Reason can lead us to conflicting conclusions. So he advised epoche, the suspension of judgment. Peace, he thought, comes not from certainty, but from accepting uncertainty. Centuries later, René Descartes took a more methodical approach. He doubted everything, his senses, the existence of the world, even his own body, until he found one thing he could not doubt, that he was thinking. I think, therefore I am. From that foundation, Descartes tried to rebuild knowledge, step by step. But his project revealed how fragile certainty can be. Even the most obvious truths can be questioned. What if we are dreaming? What if our memories are false? What if we are living in a simulation or being deceived by a powerful mind? These may sound like science fiction, but they echo real philosophical concerns. Our access to the world is always through filters of perception, language, emotion, expectation. What we see and understand is shaped by the lenses we use. Still, we act as though we know many things, and perhaps that's enough. The philosopher David Hume argued that we never truly know the future, only that it has always resembled the past. The sun has always risen, so we expect it will rise again. But that expectation is not certainty, it's habit. This kind of thinking, probabilistic, provisional, open to revision, lies at the heart of science. Scientific knowledge is not about absolute truths, but about theories tested against evidence. We believe what works, for now, and remain open to being wrong. That humility is part of what makes science powerful. It acknowledges the limits of certainty while still seeking understanding. Other kinds of knowledge are less precise, but no less important. We know love not through measurement, but through experience. We know beauty not by proof, but by recognition. We know what matters to us, often without being able to explain why. Perhaps knowledge is not just a list of facts, but a spectrum, from data to insight, from logic to intuition. And perhaps certainty is not the highest goal. Understanding may be enough. The world is complex, our minds are limited, but even in uncertainty, we can search, learn, and grow. And that, the willingness to ask, to doubt, to keep looking, may be the truest knowledge of all. Chapter 10. Why is there something rather than nothing? Of all the questions we can ask, perhaps none is more profound or more puzzling than this. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does the universe exist at all? Why are there stars and atoms and thoughts and time? Why is there a world rather than an empty silence? This question reaches beyond science, beyond philosophy, into mystery itself. In everyday life, we assume that things exist because something caused them. A tree grows from a seed. A thought arises from a brain. Every effect has a cause. But when we ask why everything exists, we're looking for a cause of all causes, an answer outside the system. Some religious traditions answer this with God, an eternal being who created the universe out of will or love. In this view, God is not just another thing within existence, but the source of existence itself, a necessary being without whom nothing could be. But skeptics might ask, why should God exist rather than nothing? If God is the answer, what explains God? Others turn to science. Some physicists suggest that the universe could have come from a quantum fluctuation, a spontaneous event in a vacuum. According to the laws of quantum mechanics, particles can appear and disappear, energy can fluctuate, and perhaps a universe can be born. But even here, we must ask, why do these laws exist? Why is there a vacuum? Why is there anything to fluctuate? The question persists. Some philosophers suggest that nothing might be unstable, that existence is somehow more natural than non-existence. Others argue that the question itself might be flawed, that we assume nothing is a real possibility when perhaps it isn't. After all, we've never seen true nothingness. Even in deep space, there is energy, gravity, the fabric of space-time. Perhaps non-existence is not an option reality could have taken. Still, the question lingers in physics, in metaphysics, in quiet moments of wonder. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Maybe there is no answer. Maybe existence is simply a brute fact. Something that just is.
Or maybe the asking is part of the answer. To wonder why there is something, to even be able to ask, is itself a marvel. The question reveals something about us, our curiosity, our humility, our longing to understand. In the end, whether the answer is scientific, spiritual, or beyond knowing, the mystery remains. And perhaps that mystery, the sheer fact of being, is the most beautiful part of all.